Now, there's not a lot of polls of Nova Scotia voters and their preference when it comes to provincial politics, but any that have been taken over the last year have shown one clear trend. The Nova Scotia Liberal Party and its leader, Stephen McNeil, are easily the most popular party in the province. But of course, elections matter, campaigns matter, and right now, McNeil and the Liberals are busy trying to make incumbent NDP Premier Darrell Dexter to make sure that he is not re-elected, and that the newest leader on the block, Progressive Conservative Jamie Bailey, stays right where he is on the opposition benches. Stephen McNeil joins us now from the Nova Scotia Legislature. Thanks so much for taking the time out of the campaign. I know it's a busy time.
Well, thanks for having me.
I want to start, Stephen, with the price of gas, because you know your opponent, Mr. Bailey, is talking about this tax on taxes, etc. But right now, gas, I think around most places in Nova Scotia, it's about $1.33 a litre. It's $1.28 here in Ottawa. It's $1.14 in Calgary. And I don't know if you're getting the question, can gas get cheaper in Nova Scotia, and what can you do about it?
Well, there's no question that we need to stop the practice of charging the HST on top of the motor fuel taxes here. But in order to do that, we have to open up, have to have the federal government's agreement to allow us to stop doing that as part of the harmonized sales tax agreement between Ottawa and the four Atlantic provinces. You know, one of the things that we begin to move to, and I hope will happen, is that we continue to move towards building the West-East pipeline, which will allow some of the Alberta crude to end up coming into St. John, New Brunswick, and then by virtue of that, either some of that would end up down in our province. But there's no question that the tax on tax situation with gasoline has to change.
Let me ask you about the price of electricity. Of course, that's been a big issue in Nova Scotia politics for a while now. I mean, every year it's been getting crazy as people try to heat their homes. I know the Maritime Link is going to factor into all this, but if you can bring it to a consumer level, will people see cheaper or stable electricity rates if you're the Premier?
We will see, what people will see immediately is the efficiency tax, which was added to by the NDP after the last election to be removed from power bills in this province. That will be paid for out of the province of Nova Scotia Power. And what people will then see is us break the monopoly of Nova Scotia Power and allow renewable energy producers to sell directly to customers in a highly regulated environment. If you go back in this province about 20 years ago, thereabouts, we broke the monopoly of the phone company, and today Nova Scotians are receiving cheaper service than they were even 20 years ago. So it's possible. There are some short-term measures that we can do by removing the NDP electricity tax, as well as then bringing in competition in a highly regulated environment to allow renewable energy producers to sell directly to customers.
We've seen competition, and you're preaching competition for the power industry, and as you mentioned with the phone business. And I want to ask about the cost of beer, and I suggest that there might be some ability to introduce competition in retail for beer and wine. And you know, this is one of the ideas that Mr. Bailey has, retail in beer and wine across the province. Why can't Sobeys, my corner store, sell me some beer and wine?
Well, typically what's happening in this province, Mr. Bailey's not talking about actually making it any cheaper to buy beer or wine. What he's talking about is having those that are selling the liquor be paid minimum wage, is what is his philosophy. We believe that if you look at the way alcohol is sold across this province, the majority of them are government stores that employ good paying jobs in many rural communities, in some cases some of the best paying jobs in rural communities. And in areas across this province where there's an issue with access, there are the agency stores. There's about 50 to 60 agency stores now in this province, so that ensures all Nova Scotians can have access. But Mr. Bailey's not talking about actually reducing the price of alcohol. What he's talking about is making those that are selling it work for minimum wage. We happen to think that that would have a negative impact, and particularly on rural Nova Scotia. We've continued to go and support the fact that those stores should be ours now. Can some of the liquor laws in the province of Nova Scotia change? Of course so. Of course they can. And as we move forward, hopefully get an opportunity to govern this province, we'll look at the liquor law legislation in the province and see the changes that can happen.
Let me suggest then as well, we just talked about the price of gas, the price of electricity, and the price of beer. At the very least, you don't have to tackle individually all three of those products or other products. There is something that a government in Nova Scotia could do, and that is lower the HST. And as you know, you're the only leader that has not unconditionally committed to cutting the HST. You want to wait until you've seen a certain amount of surplus. Let me put it to you that cutting the HST is politically popular, that perhaps you should find a way to unconditionally commit to that cut by saying you'll find savings elsewhere.
Well, first of all, we need a surplus. We're in a deficit situation right now. If you have, there's no question, the only person who believes we have a surplus is Darrell Dexter and a few cabinet ministers, and now obviously Jamie Bailey. If you looked at what happened today, RBC recorded a downturn in job growth in this province, actually lower than what was predicted when the budget was put together. So revenue projections that were already rosy are now made further into question. I believe it's prudent for any party to ensure that we get back to a balanced budget and a surplus before we start talking about cutting taxes. Because if you're going to start cutting taxes in a deficit situation, what other services are you going to cut? The NDP already cut $65 million out of public education. We can no longer afford continue to try to balance the books on the backs of our children. We have some of the longest wait times in the country here in the province of Nova Scotia. While it may be politically popular to talk about cutting the HST when you're in deficit, I am not prepared. I am not prepared to tell the voters of Nova Scotians one thing before they vote and then act differently after I get elected to be the Premier of this province. Darrell Dexter did that in 2009. He promised balanced budgets, no tax increases, did the exact opposite. Jamie Bailey is now talking about cutting over $500 million in taxes in a province that is already in deficit situation with a huge debt. He needs to tell Nova Scotians what other programs and services he's prepared to cut if he's going to try to deliver that kind of services. We've spoken to Nova Scotians over the last number of years as we've built a platform. It's balanced, it's investing in the things that Nova Scotians want, and we will reduce taxes, but we will only reduce them when we get to a point of a balanced budget.
Let me switch a bit from the revenue side of the ledger to the cost side of the ledger. And let me put it to you that for too long, Nova Scotia has had a government it simply cannot afford, that the size of the public sector relative to the size of the private sector is too large, and that somebody at some point is going to have to pay that bill by cutting government services in some shape, way, or form.
Well, we've made commitments to reduce government services. We've made out that we would be reducing departments across by 1% other than education, health, and post-secondary to a tune of $28 million. We've laid out that we would have $10 million savings annually by reducing the free grant program that has been delivered to businesses in this province. We've made a commitment to reduce over $10 million in both government advertising and in consultants that are used by government. We believe there's other possibilities inside of government to create savings. But in order for me to go to the people of this province, I want to be certain that what I tell them I can do in my platform, I am going to deliver on all of those promises. It is certainly it will be our goal to not only reach the savings projections we're talking about, but to exceed them. We will look for savings inside of government. We will challenge the public service who have been working extremely hard on behalf of all Nova Scotians to be part of the solution to help us ensure that we are not only delivering services in a timely manner to the people of this province, but we're delivering them in the most cost-effective way. And many of them can be a part of the way to help us say that, because if I've heard one thing from the public service, it is that government needs to change in the way it's delivered services. There are savings that can be had, and we're going to work with them to ensure we make those savings. But let's not forget, we are in a deficit situation right now. You cannot promise all of these tax cuts and increases in all of these programs unless you're prepared to make cuts in other places. We've listened to Nova Scotians. We've laid out a very balanced approach. We put in some creative ways to grow the economy, to increase the tax revenue in this province. And I hope on October 8th, Nova Scotians will join us in making the kind of change in this province that Nova Scotians are looking for.
Let me ask you one last one then. You could become Premier in a few weeks. Can you give us a metric, a benchmark to say, well, within 6 months of a Liberal government, there'll be so many jobs, unemployment rate will be X, GDP growth will be such and such. Is there a metric there that people can say, the McNeil government is doing what it said it's due, and it's on the path to, well, wherever? Let me ask you, is there a benchmark that we can look to in your first 100 days, 6 months?
What you will see in the first number of months of our mandate, you will see us introduce legislation to break the monopoly of Nova Scotia Power. You will see us reinvest in public education through literacy and numeracy, begin a public consultation with parents and teachers and community leaders about the curriculum that we're providing in Nova Scotia public education, to modernize it, to see if it needs to be changed to meet the challenges. We've laid that out very clearly. We've laid out ideas about how we're going to make the apprenticeship program more accessible in this province by working with labour and as well as work with non-union organizations to make sure that we are providing our workers with an opportunity to receive their work here at home. And today I announced that very early in our mandate that as a government we would do the right thing by ordering a full public inquiry into the Home for Colored Children to ensure that those men and women whose voices were not heard when they were kids will be heard by the government of Nova Scotia, led by me.
All right. Well, Stephen McNeil, best of luck. Long way to go still. And thanks so much for chatting with us tonight.
Thanks very much for having me.